Chapter 17. Full Disclosure. Later, Hambone, Kaz, Jones, Rudy, and Taylor drifted into the large, vaulted library. Kaz had showered and cleaned up. He'd pocketed the badges and carried the gun tucked into the back of his belt. Under his shirt, with his hands properly folded behind his back, it was impossible to see. As they walked in, Lee looked up. He sat at a nearby table, drawing. Kaz nodded. They traded smiles and tapped fists. "Where's Drews?" Hambone whispered. Lee jerked a thumb over his shoulder. "In the back." Hambone headed deeper into the library. Kaz sat down at Lee's table. Rudy and Taylor loitered nearby. A short distance later, Hambone discovered his friends hadn't accompanied him. He contemplated going back for them, but didn't. Ham took a seat in an abandoned carrel. The troubled teen enjoyed a brief moment of silence. He suspected it might be his last for some time. He recognized the moment as the fabled calm before the storm. A few minutes later, Ham rose and continued through the library. He found Drews, the district's resident teen lawyer, in the back, surrounded by open books and assistants, Big Chris among them. Chris stepped forward and shook hands with Ham as he approached. Drews stood and smiled. "What's the word?" "Murder one, Doc," Ham replied, no smile in his features to be found. "Those are big words," Drews countered. "What the hell are you talking about?" Chris asked. A small, breathless kid came running into the room. Oh my God! Stryker, Kasimov, he attacked the patrol and killed them all off. They say he took a Light 9 and is going around the district, shooting every guard he runs into." Shocked, Chris and Drews looked at Ham. Hambone raised his hands. "Half true," he explained. "Which half?" Drews asked. "Some of all of it and mostly none of it," Hambone said. "What does that mean?" "Kaz did take on a patrol, but he didn't kill all of them. He does have a 9, and to my knowledge he hasn't killed anyone with it yet." "How many?" Drews asked. "Dead? 1, I think, unless he lives. But if the other one dies, then 2. So maybe none, maybe 1, but also maybe 2. "How do you know?" the little kid asked. "I was there," Hambone answered. The kid folded his arms across his chest, stuck out his tongue, closed one eye, and shook his ugly face at Hambone. Hambone flinched as if to hit him, and the child laughed, retreating from the area. Drews summed up. "So of a 3-man patrol, there's at least one living citizen who's a witness to a possible murder." "What the heck, Hambone?" "Where were you? You didn't do anything?" "I didn't do anything. I was there, man. I was the only one who almost did something. But what was I gonna do? First off, he was right. Second off, he didn't ask me. He just went and did it. So yeah, I didn't do anything. And you couldn't have either. Know that." "And the going around shooting people? He's not out doing that?" "He most definitely is not," Ham replied. "The murder weapon? He used the gun?" Drews asked. "He didn't shoot anyone," Hambone replied. "Well, he tried to, but he missed. How you miss at point-blank range, I'll never know." "What did he use?" "A baton." "Nice." Chris smiled and nodded. Drews pondered the situation for a long moment. "Where is he?" "About 50 feet that way." Ham gestured back the way he'd come. "Watching the door, no doubt." Drews looked at the ceiling. "Where's the baton?" "He told the kid to get rid of it." Hambone slumped into one of the nearby chairs. "What do you mean, told a kid? It's a murder weapon. Who did he leave it with?" "Jeff. Girl's little brother. Ashley's little brother. He's with Sky. Kaz handed him the baton, told him to wash it off and get rid of it." "You're kidding. He gave it to a kid. And you mean the Ashley? She has a brother here? Who else knows that?" Hambone rolled his eyes and raised his hands. "You told him he was out of his mind, that he'll get us all killed?" "Yes, that I did, and it went over really well, let me tell you." In the front section of the library, Kaz and the others sat talking. He pulled a badge from a pocket and handed it to Lee. The young artist held it, fascinated by the weight. "All right, don't pick this up." Kaz dropped the 9 into Lee's lap. Lee stared at it, amazed. He didn't dare raise it up over the lip of the table. He didn't even reach down to touch it. His hands remained in sight, hastily sketching the object. He drew it from dozens of perspectives, without even actually touching it. A few minutes later, Hambone walked out from the racks as Lee put the finishing touches on his master Light 9 sketch, now working on it openly. The drawing looked totally realistic, and the weapon was no longer anywhere to be seen. Hambone took a good look at the drawing. He looked over to Rudy and Taylor. You guys are no help either. What, big what? Rudy asked. They both held up their hands, confused. Hey, Kaz, where's the, Hambone mimed a striking gesture as if holding a club or baton. I told you, it's taken care of, Kaz said, leaning back in his chair. Hambone crossed his arms and tilted his head, gesturing toward Drew's customary location, deep in the shelving. Whatever, Mom, Kasimov replied. Hambone laughed and sat down. You're right, sure, fine, whatever, I'm cool with it, really. Hambone realized he'd become the wet blanket in an otherwise flawless picnic, but he kept pushing anyhow. The survivor, the one who walked, is a witness to a homicide, and the murder weapon is with a kid. Kaz glared at his friend. Hambone was right as usual. Unfortunately, the opportunity to ditch the meeting and handle the situation evaporated as a handful of blades entered the library. Ricardo and Manuel entered, followed by 6 younger members. Per gang protocol, they stopped a good distance from the fist and waited to be acknowledged. Ham gestured for them to come over. He turned Lee's drawing of the Light Nine face down, but not before they saw it. Once within speaking distance, the gangsters flashed signs. The blades, 4 fingers thumb tucked behind, flat against the stomach. Ham, Rudy, and the others raised their fists in response. Only Kaz refrained from any gesture. When Ricardo and Manuel walked over to him, he simply nodded, and they returned the nod. Manuel stepped up, gesturing to the drawing. Can I see that? Hambone looked over to Lee, who looked to Kaz, who nodded. Manny picked it up, showing it to Ricardo and set it back on the table, where everyone could see it. You got mad skills, my man. Manuel extended his fist to Lee, who replied in kind. Manny turned to Kaz. But what are you going to do, come the season? I made a lot of money betting on you, Striker. This other game you're running is not so profitable, not so easy to bet on. I'm not doing it for fun. The shit has gone too far. I hear you, man. Slow train coming, I know. But remember, last riots cost 1,300 zeros. That's not a lucky number around here. I'm tired of living like a bitch, Kaz replied. Yeah, but you go supernova wrong place, wrong time. You burn all of us, too. Kaz rubbed his forehead. Everyone looked over to the doors as Tanaka, Jones, and Rebound escorted the leaders of the Dragons, Chofusa and Shell, into the library with their bodyguards. Manny and Ricardo regarded their hated rivals with open hostility. Before posturing could turn to violence, the Martians entered through a side door, Erickson and Michael with Tommy and Oddball, followed by a final gang, the Yellow Jackets. Drews and the others also appeared from the back of the library. Kaz stepped forward and nodded to Tanaka, Oddball, and the others. They secured the doors. No adults worked the library after 6. The kids had the place to themselves. Kaz approached a table and pulled out the handgun. He set it down. Then he pulled out the badges and set them on the table. Kasimov spoke loud enough to be heard by everyone. The shit has got to stop. Right now we're weak. Our unity is weak. It's been broken and our enemy can see that. Things were peaceful enough under the Devils because Mo knew who the real enemy was. He knew that first and foremost. It's a case of them versus us. After that, we could have our differences, but Dante isn't like that. You can see he's not here. We sent word, but I knew he wouldn't come because he makes deals with them. He uses them against all of us. You guys treat me like I'm crazy because I don't wear colors, and I've always said that was because of the punchball thing. Yeah, I'm lead striker, but that's bullshit. I don't roll with you because I can't stand fighting other zeros. I live here on D13. I play for D13. All you guys support the team. I know your set doesn't matter. I'm the same way. All you guys are my family. I don't care what colors you wear. Our enemy doesn't care either. They don't face us with honor. They carry cattle prods and guns. We're livestock and they're cowboys. We cannot fight amongst ourselves anymore. We need to remember who the enemy is, and I say it's time we make a stand. Erickson, the leader of the Red Stripe Martians, stepped up. What do you have in mind? First, I need you idiots to declare full truce right now. Idiots, huh? Lots of respect you got there, Striker, Erickson said. Manuel stepped forward, diffusing the tension between Kaz and the Martian leader. Hold one, Red. Let me get a little more direct. Kasimov, this I have to ask. I have seen this girl, and she is fine. So what I need to know is this. Are you taking us to war over a piece of ass? This influenced a series of nodding heads and affirmations. Nothing against you, but I can't go buying shares in another man's woman. He laughed, dispelling the tension. The other kids laughed too. The mood grew a little brighter. The smiling Kasimov paused. Manuel took the opportunity to rephrase his inquiry. I mean, are we talking full-scale mutiny, or do you just want your piece of tail out of jail? Kasimov laughed with the other kids. After a moment he raised his hands and spoke. Okay, fair enough. Here's what I say to that. I've got no claim on Ashley. She is hot, I do like her, but I've hardly said 2 words to the girl. Really, she doesn't take shit off anyone. What would she want? Laughing, Hambone rephrased, what would Ashley do? The kids burst into laughter. Kaz spoke over them. She's not just a piece of ass. She's beautiful, but there's more to this. For one thing, she is innocent. She's not some psycho musclehead. But here's what it is. For us, for you and me, we need to stop waiting to be rescued and do some rescuing of our own. Drews, listen up. I want your thoughts about this next part. The citizens don't give a fuck if some unlucky Zero wins an occasional beatdown. But a frail little girl? She's here for less than a week and now she's arrested? For an act of self-defense? She's more than just a Zero. She's a symbol. She's an underdog and they know it. Which is exactly why they're never going to let her out, Erickson stated. All she did was stand up for herself. Fight back. What any one of us should do. She stood her ground and she took down the 2 biggest criminals here. Word is she did Donovan too, Chofusa said. As a leader of the Dragons, the gang second in stature to the Devils, Cho commanded a great deal of respect. That's right. Word is she did Donovan too, who was a fucking psycho rapist. But where's the proof? Shit, who else could have done it? Cho asked. My point exactly. They're afraid of her, Kaz said. And they should be. Now they're gonna be scared of us too. These rich-ass shitbag citizens waltzing around here like they own the fucking air we breathe. Just popping kids for no reason? Fuck 'em. I don't care about Ash or Dante or Mo or Lethal, I really don't. What I'm pissed about is Joe Dickno's candy-ass Angel City spoiled brat citizen who comes in here on a pub serve and then takes out all his shit on us. I mean, what are we? What purpose do we serve to this city? Are we really here for them to beat up on? They could care less if this district bursts into flames and we all get flushed down the gravity well. I'm sick of it. I say we revolt and kill the man before he kills us. The kids made neither sounds of agreement nor any motion to interrupt. You know something? I had every intention of attacking that patrol when I first walked up on him. Hodges saw me coming too. He saw it in my eyes and I hesitated. He saw me think twice. So just to rub it in, he smacked a little girl in the back of the head. He hit her so hard she went flying, knocked the hell out. He wanted me to see him do it. He wanted to see if I would do anything. Now he's most likely dead, and I swear to you, he's just the first one. I've been here as long as I can remember. My first memories are of God's Hotel. I care more about that innocent little girl than Ashley or myself or any of you. I want these goddamn soldiers out of my fucking house. The kids stood quietly, but he could tell they were leaning his way. Then, I want to sail the whole district out to high water and live happily ever after. That's what I want. The kids were stunned. Their hopes had just been raised, yet the goal beyond impossible. Finally, Erickson spoke. Shit, son, you got a magic wand? Better yet, say we get that far. Then what? Chofusa asked. I mean, we gotta eat. Kaz picked up the handgun. If some fool is so tough, you need a gat to keep him in line, then he sure as fuck can figure out how to grow potatoes and steal cars. Thank you, Manny said, clearly pleased with the answer. Okay then, what now? Ricardo asked. Drews held up a hand. If I may, he asked. Kaz gestured for him to speak freely. In response to Kasimov's hasty action, the administration will play their usual gambit. They will arrest some innocent kids for conditioning, perhaps a few more than usual. They will react with fear and aggression, the way they always do. Drews pushed his glasses up. To continue toward our goal, we must confront them in a way they are not prepared for. They are accustomed to playing us against each other. We should let them think it's working. And then, when they least expect it, give them Little Bighorn. Is that some kinky shit? Erickson asked. Yeah, what the fuck? Jones echoed. No, Drews held up his hands. Like the Native Americans at the Battle of Little Bighorn, we sucker them in and crush them with overwhelming force. We must hit them so hard they cannot hit back. How'd that work out for the Indians? Erickson asked. Kaz held up his open hand. It's a motto of this country. Out of many, one. He closed his hand into a fist. Hambone smiled. Cry of revolutionaries everywhere. Chapter 18. The Baton. 3 junior high kids stood surrounded by a dozen of their peers. Each member of the trio held a piece of law enforcement gear. One kid wore a helmet, another a shield, and the third an arm guard. Interrupting and overlapping each other, they breathlessly told their story in a braid. Oh man, Stryker went nuts with the baton. Just wham, wham, wham. Todd was wearing a much too large arm guard, and as he mimed striking someone, it bounced on his forearm. Oh damn, look, look. One of the kids pointed to the spots of blood that freckled the riot shield. Mike, who held the shield, continued with the story. And then, remember, he gave that kid the, Mike gestured as if he were handing something off, and it was all dripping. He explained with more body language than words, but his meaning was clear. The baton had been covered with gore. And he was just, bam, 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 here you go. Mike mimed wrapping the baton on the ground. Totally insane. Despite the obvious confusion, the audience appeared utterly entranced. Across the district, Dante listened to a similar story. Shit, I think that kid still has a baton, Jason explained. You're telling me that a murder weapon is floating around in the possession of a 10-year-old? Dante asked. I would say the 9 is more important. I thought you said he didn't shoot anyone. Not yet, almost, but he didn't. He shot at a guy, but he missed. Get this, hysterical. Asshole Stryker's holding the gat to the back of the pig's head. Jason mimes firing a gun, pivoting his hand 90 degrees, his index finger going from horizontal to vertical adjustment. He missed, man. How do you miss from this close? So he didn't shoot anyone. Like I said, not yet. Dante shook his head in frustration. Not yet. Not at all. He's cooled off by now. He's thinking now. He's got a heater. No need to be reckless. He's not shooting people now. He's thinking. The baton is what he used. That's what we want. You said he left it with a boy? Jeff? Her brother? They said that's who he was. He was swinging it on a string. He was with that girl, Sky. Jason sounded pleased with himself. Dante was not as entertained. Get me that baton. Don't let me see you again unless you have it, you idiot. Are you a devil or did you join the goddamn hippies? Yama, go with him. Yama rolled his eyes but walked from the block ahead of Jason. Is he serious? Jason asked, following. You heard what he did to Mongo? Yama answered. Yeah, I heard. Well, I was there, man. Believe it. Whatever he wants. I'm giving that fool whatever he wants. Knowing the older members of the Fist were in the library for the Light 9 council meeting, Jason and Yama fearlessly stalked their dorms, searching for Jeff and Sky. The younger kids mostly tried to avoid the intimidating devils. Jason cornered a middle school kid, Wilson. Where's Sky? Who? Jason punched him in the stomach. The younger boy collapsed to his knees. Funny guy, Jason said. He kneed Wilson in the mouth, splitting his lip. Will stifled a cry, and Jason let him slide to the floor. Yama leaned against a locker, content to let Jason do the heavy lifting. Where's Sky? Jason yelled. Who else doesn't want to tell me? He advanced on the next closest kid, Lenny. No, I don't know. She's not here. Lenny fled Jason's reach. He moved toward Ben, a portly orphan with no hope of escape. You don't know where she is either, fatty? Ben cried out in terror and threw up his hands. They went to the pits! They went to the pits! He stammered. To the pits, huh? Jason replied, cockily standing taller. Ben darted away from the angry devil. I don't know anything. Don't ask me. Lenny, much smaller than Ben, didn't hesitate to smack him. You just told him everything, you pussy asshole. Sky and Jeff walked into the dorm, not 20 feet away. Everyone froze and stared. Ben hit Lenny back. Ow! Lenny yelled. I was messing with him, Ben explained. Hey, bitch, Jason yelled, ignoring the bickering kids. Hey, asshole, Sky replied, recognizing Yama and Jason as members of Carver's hierarchy, the Devils. She turned to confront Jason, giving Jeff as much of a shield as possible. Jeff slipped behind her. Run, Sky said over her shoulder. Where is it? Jason demanded. Go fuck yourself, Sky answered. Jeff backed away, but didn't run, as he'd been told. We'll see who fucks who. Jason walked toward her. Skye tried to kick him, but he caught her foot and threw her to the side. Jeff pulled the baton from behind his back. "Looking for this?" Jeff turned on the electrified weapon. "You smart enough to just give that to me, or do you want to try your luck?" "Where do you want it?" Jeff asked. Jason took a couple steps forward, but Jeff didn't move. Jason hesitated, with only a small gap between them. Jeff had also spent a year training at flying dragons. He'd learned one lesson: those who hesitate get hit. He swiftly stepped forward and smacked Jason across the face with the stun baton. Jason stumbled after the electric blast. The rather devastating shock-smack combination seemed to take some of the fight out of him. "You still want it?" Jeff jabbed him in the ribs, blasting him from his feet. Jason dragged himself away from Jeff and the electrocution device. Yama kicked off from his place against the wall and walked towards Skye and Jeff. The devil glanced over to Skye and nodded politely. Jeff, his ego bolstered by Jason's easy defeat, saw his opportunity and charged Yama as well. The older boy was ready. Without even really looking at Jeff, he effortlessly evaded the boy's short strikes and jabs. And then, suddenly, Yama kicked the weapon from Jeff's hands. The baton spun across the room, bouncing off lockers, bedposts, and finally skittering along the floor. Jeff rubbed his stinging hands and backed away. Jason struggled to his feet and lumbered after the baton. Wilson, still angry over the split lip and punch to the guts, sprinted over to the weapon, scooped it up, and fled the dorm. Jason cursed him, but after his recent shock, could do little else. Yama turned away from Jeff to sprint after Wilson. He was fast. Skye feared he would catch him before Wilson got very far. Skye, Jeff, and the other kids followed, a procession of orphans chasing after Wilson, Yama, and the baton. Once outside, Wilson had turned to the right, sprinting for a nearby bridge, while Yama accelerated to close the gap. Wilson cleared a hedge and turned hard left. Yama adjusted his course to close ground faster. Yet before the infamous devil could catch the younger orphan, Skye crashed into him, dragging and wrestling him to the soft athletic field. Yama's turn had brought him into line with the girl, and she made the sacrifice he clearly hadn't anticipated. He wrestled with Skye, trying to escape her, but she noticed he didn't try too hard. She had wrapped her arms and legs around him, holding him to the ground. From their place on the field, the entwined Yama and Skye watched Wilson reach the bridge and hurl the baton into the empty air. Yama stopped struggling and Skye released him. He got to his feet and offered her his hand to help her up. She took it. He gently lifted her to her feet. The kids gathered around them, waiting to see what might happen next. Yama looked at Skye for a long time, smiled, but said nothing. The boy turned, leaving the athletic complex for the bolt, abandoning the shocked and stammering Jason to make his own way back. Chapter 19. The Killer of 1,000 Men. Lieutenant Gray, whom Kaz had tried to shoot in the back of the head, waved to the security panel at the servants' entrance of his father's stately home. The multi-wing domicile hadn't been home to any sort of family during David's lifetime, though he had grown up there. He silently moved through the house, encountered no one, and reached a small door in the basement. David unlocked the knob with a solitary key from his pocket and opened it. He entered the pitch-black room and closed the door again behind him, locking the deadbolt. In darkness, he made his way over to the edge of a cot and sat down. He didn't turn on the lights, he just sat there quietly in the dark. Years ago, in this makeshift childhood bunker, he and his closest friends had organized missions, planned recon ops and raids, and unanimously decided that they would become soldiers. David's father, a senator, spent most of his time away from his home state. After a bitter custody battle, his non-citizen mother had returned to her homeland, somewhere in Europe. David was 3. He never saw her again. The senator had been married at least once before, and a few times since. David suspected the man remembered his mother, Aurelia, more often and more fondly than his offspring by her. David knew of 3 older brothers and sisters living in Connecticut, from his father's first marriage. He'd once met a brother from New York, named Douglas, but he didn't know if it was he or Douglas that were older. David had learned of his siblings during a period of brief self-discovery, when he found himself obsessed with hundreds of news stories about his father. After seeing pictures of the man, with siblings he'd never met, David refused to be photographed with him ever again. Tutors and instructors had run David's early life, and the estate employed housekeepers, groundskeepers, nannies, and security staff. satisfying the relatively unenforced legal requirements of supervision during his younger years. Once he'd entered school, the teachers vaguely knew him as a senator's son. He seemed to be generally well-adjusted, so the circumstances concerning his home life rarely came up. No one saw fit to make any suggestions. After all, he was a senator's son, and if it ain't broke, stay off the grass. Years ago, David would occasionally wake to discover the estate overrun with his father's staff. He would slip through the halls, looking for a glimpse of the man he knew only from news photos. When encountering him, he was always struck by how much older he looked than when they'd last spoken. In addition to the political ambitions of his father, David's grandfather had served as a senator and even held the term as chief executive. David presumed his father's childhood might have been similar to his own. Participating in sports and other extracurricular activities, David gave the impression that his home life was perfectly comfortable and fulfilling. He saw no reason to behave otherwise. He would not complain. He was a senator's son. As he got older, he avoided the staff and the senator as much as possible. When they arrived, he vanished. By 9th grade, David had mastered the art of stealth. He could go for days without encountering any of the estate staff. On more than one occasion, the senator mistook David for one of his aides and directed him in some tedious task. David always agreed and nodded, only to immediately vanish again. All through high school, he had kept himself busy. He wondered what would happen when he graduated. He had thought it possible his father might forget him entirely. He might become a prisoner of the estate, unable to leave without a state-issued citizenship identity card. Considered temporary citizens during childhood, young adults of the Republic must apply to have their citizenship ratified by the state upon reaching the age of 18. As he neared his June birthday, the staff began delivering letters addressed to David from his father's office. The correspondence informed him that one of the senator's most trusted constituents would handle his sponsorship. The summer session was in full swing, and the senator couldn't leave Washington just now. David was amazed by whichever secretary had remembered and scheduled the appointment. He waited at the application hall the entire day. The sponsor's secretary called late in the afternoon to reschedule for the next day. The late afternoon rescheduling went on for an entire week. David suspected that his father's relationship with this particular constituent might be a little strained. He could sympathize with that. David himself showed up promptly at 8 a.m. every morning as agreed. He sat on a bench across the street from the induction hall and watched his classmates enter. The weather that week was rather pleasant. David read books and ate at a nearby cafe. Every day a street vendor would show up around lunchtime, selling steaks and chicken, hot and sizzling from his rolling grill, which beat the cafe's cakes and muffins by miles. David watched the park personnel trim hedges and rake leaves. He could wait. David had mastered the art of waiting and considered this skill foremost among his unique talents. Most people grew hostile whenever forced to wait for more than a few minutes. David could do nothing for hours. One evening, as a young man of 12 or 13, he'd spent 3 hours behind a chair in his father's study, less than 5 feet away from the man. His father never knew, and David told no one. He considered that evening his masterpiece. If he never spoke of it, it would remain flawless and perfect. He knew, if he ever bragged of it, if he ever told anyone, the magic feeling of those few hours would be dead to him. He hadn't called his father's office to report the sponsor citizen's absence. David knew politics was a game. In this circumstance, he knew he played the part of a pawn. If it bothered him, no one would ever hear about it. He just continued waiting. While waiting, he pondered the many facets of the society he inhabited. It seemed that everyone believed the Republic hovered on the verge of collapse. For well over a century now, people felt that anything could spell disaster. The end. Mankind had eradicated disease, tamed fire, electricity, and gravity, socialized labor, and silenced dissent. If the world were collapsing, the only likely culprit was man himself. David didn't see crisis. He saw exploitation. The people lived in fear, very real fear, because their leadership insisted on robbing them blind and threatened all protesters with a charge of treason. David happily watched society decay right before his eyes. He hoped to get an opportunity to give it a nudge or two toward the edge. A pretty girl walked by and smiled. He smiled back. His mind wandered and he let it go, fascinated by its sheer force of will to keep thinking useless thoughts. A man tossed a plastic bottle into a recycling bin. David wondered if, say, a plastic toy, worn out and tossed in a recycling bin, ever became another object that the same person encountered again, later in another form, maybe as a bottle. The possibility fascinated him. Eventually his mind returned to the citizen who'd consigned him to a park bench. The third day he brought a notebook and a pen. After an hour of waiting, he wrote. 10 years later, in his father's basement, David reached up to the shelf of military command manuals. Without looking for it, he found the tattered notebook. He turned on a soft, dim lamp and opened the first page. Problem of Citizenship, an essay on our political system by David Gray. June 17th, 2300. I'm 18. My father's a senator. I'm sitting here waiting to become a citizen, which is something I'm not even sure I want to be. I have nothing but contempt for this society and its citizens. What does the word even mean, citizenship? They say only citizens are truly free. Really? Free to do what? This is what I know. Some of it could be wrong, but here it is, my brief history of the Republic. After fleeing aristocratic tyranny in Europe, my ancestors inherited this land after infecting and decimating its native people with war, famine, pestilence, and death. We farmed and built a nation on the backs of slave labor. We had a civil war, a gold rush, an industrial revolution, 2 world wars, and a civil rights movement instead of another civil war, followed by 3 centuries of imperial dominance, including wars fought over drugs, oil, and religious fanaticism. However, our biggest winning front was the wars fought with lawyers and banks for, by, and with money. After all, business is war. Starvation is a sufficient nonviolent weapon. As Sun Tzu said, the best generals win without firing a shot. They hold the entire world under siege. By the late 2090s, the world population topped 10 billion. Greed bred poverty and crime. Murder rates reached an all-time high. There wasn't enough room, food, or blankets to go around. America choked on tired, poor, and hungry huddled masses, drowning in filth and on the brink of collapse. Riots and looting had become rampant. The police had been spread too thin for too long. The Democratic Republican government, driven by a capitalist economy, became unstable and unsustainable. If it continued, the country would have become a failed state. They couldn't let that happen. The legislature presented a solution. If the people wanted health care and other basic human rights and services, they would be required to give. Citizenship required sacrifice, 2 years in most cases. The 73rd through 92nd Amendments to the Constitution, commonly known as the Citizens Equality Act, inverted citizenship and recreated the country. This one act of legislation, composed in 3 parts and over 1,700 pages, laid out the foundation for the gates of citizenship. Amendment 83 pertained to the office of the President, declaring it an appointed, not elected position. 88 and 89 laid out new laws pertaining to registered churches and charitable foundations. 90 through 92 created new federal restrictions to states' powers. But first and foremost, the 73rd Amendment stated that birth on American soil did not guarantee citizenship. The Equality Act declared that the privilege and honor of citizenship must be earned. First, one must graduate childhood. Applicants for citizenship must be 18 years of age, they must be healthy, educated, and accompanied by an adult sponsor, an accredited citizen of the Republic. If approved, after the tests and interviews, the applicant must choose a sacrifice to the state. According to Amendment 74, the sacrifice, or affirmation of allegiance, could be made in one of 3 ways: land, currency, or service. That being 1 acre of municipal land, its equivalent in currency, or 2 years public service. The suggested value of 1 acre of municipal land is around 1 million talents. No one could ever hope to earn that much doing 2 years of menial chores for the state. Most applicants choose public service. The 2 years could be served in either the National Defense Forces or the Humanitarian Social Services. One could also opt for the officers or executive courses, but the requirements were higher and the term of duty longer. In return for the extended service, the applicant is promised advancement through the gates of citizenship at an accelerated rate, providing he or she doesn't wash out somewhere along the way. Each successive gate of citizenship requires further sacrifice, but also awards additional rights. As the propaganda so clearly explains, citizenship requires sacrifice. I sit here staring up at the 6-foot letters, carved in granite, hanging over the gates of the Angel City Induction Hall in District 1. Citizenship requires sacrifice. Enlistment terms are broken up into 2 categories: national defense, or social service. This is said to be the last real choice a citizen ever makes. National defense, the military and law enforcement branches, guns and rockets of all sizes, jets, helicopters, tanks, long-range satellite-guided roaming missile squadrons. The alternative is a social service, medical health, convalescent care, veterinarians, and dental technicians. Most citizens serve their enlistment, graduate to second gate, and attend university. The gates are a series of grades or levels. Each gate requires different sacrifices from the applicant and is awarded in the form of a key and an updated Republic ID. With each gate of citizenship, additional rights are earned. First gate citizens have the right to emergency health care, subsistence rations, secondary education, and the right to a hearing in a court of law if accused of a crime. A second gate citizen with decent high school grades and 2 years honorable service can pretty much get into any college they want. They can get married and appeal a case decided against them in a court of law. Third gate citizens can purchase land and serve on public committees. Fourth gate citizens can go into business and run for office. Fifth gates can form corporations, hold governorships, chair public committees, and serve as municipal judges. Sixth gates can hold Senate and congressional seats, chair ambassadorships to other nations, and sit on the bench at the state level. State governors can commission and develop new cities and districts, as well as reform or close existing ones down, a godlike power over entire metropolitan areas. Seventh gates often hold numerous chief executive positions and occasionally serve on the Supreme Court. Among the masses, seventh gates are the first men of the Republic and largely believed to be responsible for over 2/3 of the world's wealth, health, and welfare. The prerequisite for eighth gate is that the citizen be nominated and inaugurated as the federal chief executive officer. A government is chiefly concerned with its own survival. The nation is a business, a monopoly on protecting the country. When one chief executive steps down, another is nominated to take his place. There are only a handful of ninth gate citizens. Occasionally their names are tattooed to the flagstone of a new building. Tenth gate citizens are unseen, unknown, a myth. When I go inside to my induction ceremony, there will be 5 rituals to undergo. First, a 6-question placement test, then the pledge, my choice of a sacrifice, participating in a trial, and the practical exam. The 6 questions as I've heard them are, do you believe in the freedom of speech, the freedom of religion, the right to bear arms, the right to work and earn capital, the right to own property, the right to self-defense, and the defense of national security? A no, in response to any of the above questions, disqualifies the applicant for citizenship. Next, the loyalty pledge is straightforward enough. Please raise your right hand. Do you pledge and affirm by your oath all fealty, loyalty, homage, and obedience to the Democratic Republic of the United States of America? The applicant, the supplicant, or bitch, replies, I do affirm by my oath all fealty, loyalty, homage, and obedience to the Democratic Republic of the United States of America. And that's it. You are now officially a citizen of these here United States. You can fuck off the whole next part. Your sponsor's out. His obligation is satisfied, and you are now, from this moment forward, subject to the laws and hierarchy of the Republic. Some people do, in fact, screw up every moment from that point forward. Their sponsor is off the hook. He's only responsible for you while you are in the Republic's building. He's there for liability issues, literally, in case you should slip and crack your head open, after you start the process but before you complete it. That is literally all he is there for. If you are a parent, this is the moment you are legally no longer responsible for your child. As a citizen, you are a voluntary adult ward of the court. And in this world on anti-gravity cables and cars that pilot magnetic currents in the sky, it would be appropriate to say, as I have often heard it said, all roads lead to court. If you're still with the program, and hey, let's go just for the ride, the choice of sacrifice is the 3rd step of the application process. If I choose to become a citizen, I must choose time in the military or the medical ward, inflicting wounds or dressing them. You don't get to choose what unit you're assigned to, you just took an oath of obedience. The choice you are getting here is a convenience, wherein consideration of those involved makes it easier for everyone. Then comes the trial and the practical. All new citizens are required to participate in the legal process. They must deliver a verdict in a capital case and then commute or execute the sentence. They must either personally execute a convicted criminal or reduce the sentence to life in a labor camp. This is the applicant's final test, and it becomes part of the permanent record. In the Social Services Department, the death penalty is frowned upon. Citizens who choose to execute a prisoner usually don't do well in the SSD. Also, as one might expect, soldiers who pardon a traitor or murderer often find themselves isolated in their new environment as well. The issue of the death penalty separates our society more than sex, affluence, religion, race, or intellect. One could say it's a test of intellect. In fact, many do. It is also a test of will and composure under pressure. Half of those who undergo the practical exam choose to execute a person they have never met, seen, or even heard about. At 18 years old, the Democratic Republic of the United States sets one half of itself at odds with the other half, in perpetuity ad infinitum. 50% is divisive, to say the least. Let's not forget, the citizens who do execute a convicted criminal are awarded a 1,000-talent executioner's fee. If I choose to become a citizen, I must choose to grant someone a life of pain and suffering, or end them forever. It feels like such a trap. Society is like a casino. If you play by their rules, and their rules say you are going to lose. I don't want to be cynical. What kind of game is that? But I have an idea. Wait until they get a load of me. In the storage room, in the basement, David set down the notebook and recalled the day his sponsor, a Fourthgate citizen, finally arrived, late in the afternoon on Friday. David didn't complain about the 4 previous days he'd spent waiting. He was sure the man's bold act of protest would end up hurting him more in the long run. You don't keep a senator's son waiting for a week by accident. David's father was a powerful man, and those who routinely insult their superiors eventually find someone willing to indulge their self-destructive desires. David presented his application. He qualified for the officer candidate's commitment and picked the foreign military assignment as his preferred term of service. The Republic accepted his application, and he was sworn in. His sponsor's work done, they silently shook hands and parted company. David watched the man go, feeling a deep sense of pity for him. So many seemed ill-suited for their destiny. David and the other new citizens were ushered into a large orientation amphitheater. After a short speech, they were issued their new Republic IDs and corralled into the nearby judicial branch. There they participated in a capital case, served on a jury, and delivered a verdict. After that came the practical exam that everyone was so obsessed with. The summary courts building served as a massive storage and processing area between the courthouse and the designated prison, or just as likely, the morgue. 18 and old enough to balance life and death, the practical exam could not be avoided, postponed, or escaped, short of physically fleeing the entire ritual, which was simple enough. Several had done it. On the surface, the practical had been designed to illustrate the core principles of integrity, honor, and self-determination. Interpretation of the results was what really mattered. David suspected that in reality, the young citizen's composure was what mattered most, regardless of the choice. The lives of the convicted meant nothing, and applicants who crumbled under stress couldn't be counted on, not on the battlefield nor in the emergency room. At the reception counter, a battle-scarred veteran greeted David's group. He explained the finer points of handgun safety. He pointed out the weapon's safety, trigger lock, and explained that the modern pistol would fire 1,024 rounds of caseless ammunition on a single magazine. "That's a lot of bad guys," he laughed, doing his best to keep the feeling light. David thought it just made him seem insensitive. The basics explained, the vet grew serious as he issued weapons to the new citizens. He encouraged them to vote with their conscience and dispense justice or mercy as they saw fit. Restrained in large cylindrical one-man prisons, the convicted waited patiently. Frosted panels revealed only the head and shoulders of the condemned, so they might be engaged in final arguments, their last chance to plead for mercy and their lives. What the opaque fiber-weave tubes lack in dignity, they make up for in efficiency. Plugged into an intravenous chemical diet and strapped into a humiliating waste removal unit, the convicts wait, their hands and legs immobilized, only their minds are free to wander. They wait and watch as their neighbors are either shot or sent to the labor farms. Some new citizens offer polite cross-examination, but most have their minds made up long before arriving at this point in time. The citizens serving the Social Service Department immediately offer the first criminals encountered life sentence in a labor camp. The criminals thank them profusely. When confronted by a young citizen bound for the military, all that is usually offered is a final moment for last words. The convicted may plead, some even struggle, but none have escaped the tube, except through clemency. The odds are well known, 50-50, an even split, life or death. The labor farms lay scattered across the Midwest. Some try their hand at escape, and more than a couple make it. Mercy is, after all. That day, David Alexander Gray executed over 1,000 condemned criminals. The weapon they had issued him held 1,007 rounds, 17 having been fired since the weapon's last reload and servicing. David calmly shot 1,007 criminals in the face. He lost count early on. Once he started, he just kept moving until the gun failed. He didn't get emotional. He just moved and fired, moved and fired. Some of the criminals freaked out. They screamed and yelled at him. He was a murderer, worse than any of them. David stepped up, slid his ID through the panel, and pulled the trigger. Again, again, again. His composure remained flawless. He never winced, blinked, or flinched. He didn't smile or frown. He kept firing until the gun was empty, until it ran out of bullets. He didn't enjoy it, but neither was he terrified. His ID displayed his growing account balance with each new execution. No one stopped him. Only the weapon betrayed him in the end. He laughed at the irony. Now David had a new ninja masterpiece. This eclipsed the secret hours of his life in so many ways. For one, this was not a secret. His hatred for the world had been exposed, to be judged and sentenced. Who would question him, arrest him? After all, he was now out of bullets. David returned to the armory. The gun coach at the counter took the weapon from him. He didn't offer to reload it. He simply took it and backed away. David turned from the counter and walked to the exit. He'd discovered something else that was rather profound that day. He discovered he was free to be silent in public. This was different than remaining silent and unseen. This was just as powerful, but in an inverted sort of way. In most cases, some explanation of exposition was called for, but not always. And in the case of the prisoners, many of them had asked him questions, but he had not replied. He was not required to. Courtesy and obligation were different. Everything depended on inner stillness. While David was killing, people had started talking about it. Before he returned the weapon, a small crowd had formed outside the hall. News reporters had been called and arrived, cameras rolling. No one had ever done anything like this before. Just before David exited, a member of the reporter's crew came out of the hall. 1,007! 1,007! The most anyone has ever done was 34, and that was in Jersey. It's a new record, all right. A couple minutes later, David stepped out to a sea of blank faces. They all just stared at him. A stunningly beautiful chestnut-haired reporter, just a few years older than himself, was at the front of the knot of live-stream journalists. They stared at him with shock and horror. David looked down at his chest and arms. Light red spots had long ago given over to dark red stains, and lighter wet blood splattered atop it. The wind shifted and the stink of death washed out from him, spreading across the crowd. They recoiled as if of one mind. The pretty reporter took 2 steps backward. David caught his reflection in a nearby window. He smiled at himself, but refrained from the thumbs up. The thought did make him chuckle, however, which was every bit as damning as if he'd come out chewing on a baby's skull. David turned and walked 20 feet to a nearby fountain. No one made any move to stop him. He rinsed the thickest red from his arms and face, but his shirt was a lost cause. The reporter steeled herself and advanced. The first thing David noticed was the freckles sprinkled across the bridge of her nose. She'd tried to cover them up with foundation. He wanted to ask her why, but the rose pink of her lips distracted him, and then she spoke. Her voice rang of condescension, accusation, and judgment, and to be fair, he was covered in gore. "Sir, excuse me, sir." "Yes," David answered. "What's your name, citizen?" "David Gray." "Mr. Gray, during your practical, what did you do?" "The food we eat should not be harvested by prisoners." The reporter stalled. "Also, I think it should be illegal for me to kill 1,000 people in one day. Don't you?" David smiled. The reporter just stared at him, utterly befuddled, dumbfounded. "Where are the authorities? Who will arrest me?" "No one." "What'll you do with me? Who'll cast a stone?" "Should at least try me for murder and put me in one of those tubes?" "No?" "No. They gave me 1,000,000 talents instead. How's that for irony?" What are you saying? Did you just kill 1,000 people to make some kind of political statement? No one obstructed him in his next task either, visiting a nearby shopping center and replacing his soiled button-up with a clean and fresh pullover version. His ride home on public transport drew horrified stares and terrified glances. His hair was still thick with red, his hairline especially. His skin was still wet with blood that became pink wet as he sweat on the June evening and ran off in butcher's rivulets. His new shirt became stained before he got home. He arrived after dark, naturally approaching from the back of the house, his unseen ninja path into the estate. The lordly manor was outfitted with the best surveillance system, but every system has holes. David was rarely picked up on any of the cameras if he could avoid it. He arrived at the back door, opening to the anteroom between the vacant study and the second kitchen. Across the patio, the self-sustaining greenhouse reflected the night sky. David looked up at the stars for a moment, the cosmos, dazzling in its brilliance, the great S-shape of the twinkling suns, the Milky Way galaxy, winking at humanity over the vast ocean of space. The fresh air, after his brisk walk, felt both relaxing and invigorating, cooling his face, neck, and shoulders. Then his gaze fell to his own reflection in the glass wall. He was something to behold. For a moment he did not recognize himself. His skin looked dead white pale, under the crimson death tint that had washed over him. This time he did not smile. He had been caught unaware, and for the first time he knew he had finally seen himself. This was his true visage. This was where his self-interest had led him. Perhaps they would change the law, but that would never change who he was now. Not in this lifetime. The blood might wash off, but not really, not ever. David took a deep breath. Later the shower ran red for several minutes. After he was finished with them, the white towels had a pink shade. The weapon, having been returned as they all were, went up on the wall over the instructor's counter. The metal plate on the small plaque bore only one word, kilo. The next day the Senate drafted and passed legislation restricting citizens to one executioner's fee, period, not one per executed criminal. Gray's performance assured copycat attempts. When the Treasury was threatened, lawmakers were swift to act. Years later, the pistol was tracked down by some colleagues and presented to David, a farewell gift from friends as he transferred units. It had been cleaned, oiled, and officially registered as his personal sidearm. David was touched. Over the intervening years, he'd formed an attachment to the gun like nothing else in his life. Now, on a temporary assignment between deployments, he'd handed the weapon over to some rioting high school student. David set the notebook on the floor. If he was going to ask for help from anyone, he needed to retrieve his badge and his weapon first. Chapter 20. Ignorance is Bliss. Lieutenant David Gray arrived on the lower level of the athletic complex just after dawn. Dressed in civilian clothes, he looked more like an instructor than a cop. He found Kaz and his entourage on their way to breakfast. Kaz recognized him and stepped forward. The 3 badges pinned to his chest reflected the early morning sunlight. The handgun tucked into the back of his pants pulled his waistline tight. "I thought I told you not to come back here, citizen," Kaz said. "I'm willing to help you, but you need to trust me," Gray replied. The kids nearby turned to watch. Some laughed. Kaz remained quiet. Hambone, Jones, Rudy, Taylor, and Oddball all stood behind him. "How's that work?" Kaz's hand found the butt of his weapon. "A small group of people can change the world," Gray said. Now Kaz laughed. "You don't like the way things are, do something about it. But you have to, because no one else can do it for you." "What are you doing here?" Kaz asked. "Everyone needs help," Gray offered. Hambone stepped forward. "You just said we have to do it ourselves." "I just can't do it for you." "Do what? You can't do what for us?" Kaz asked. "Lead your revolution. You have to do that for yourselves. But I can't help you from the outside." The kids stood silent. Kaz faced the officer. "Who said anything about a revolution?" "Well, it's not. Until you win, that is. If you don't win, it's just a riot." "We just want them to stop fucking with us," Kaz said. "That's never going to happen. You need a real victory, a perfectly executed coup." "What's a coup?" Oddball asked. It's a mutiny, you ox, Chris answered. You have to take over, and you have to do it without killing anyone. If you start killing people, they will blow you out of the sky, kids or not. You have to take hostages, so you have something to bargain with. Is this making sense? Even prisoners are taken seriously when they take hostages. Kaz and the orphans stood quietly, blinking in the early morning sunlight. I can help you. I can talk to the mayor, the governor, whoever. But first, you have to give me back my weapon and my badge. Now I know you're crazy, Kaz laughed. I can take them from you if you prefer. If I prefer, Kaz said to the audience over his shoulder, fearlessly mocking the adult. Several of the kids laughed. I don't mind shooting unarmed children, Gray said. I could have shot you, but Hodges and Fleming had it coming. Soon they'll send state troopers, then the National Guard, and maybe even a few Marines. The kids stood silently. Have you shot anyone yet? Gray asked. What? With the gun, have you shot anyone? Just you. Kaz pulled the weapon and held it at his side. Hambone and the other kids stepped back. Gray cocked his head. I bet you can't even hit me from there. Kaz raised the weapon, but he never even came close. Gray moved like the wind, covering 3 steps and catching the boy's wrist before the barrel ever found him. He twisted Kasimov's wrist. The youth tried to step away, but the lieutenant trapped his heel and elbow. Gray took half a step to the side. Kaz teetered, off balance. His body nodded in opposing directions. He stifled a cry. Gray held the boy in check and removed the weapon from his hand. He then moved his heel and shoved Kaz, who spun loose and crashed to the ground several meters away. I'm sorry, but this has sentimental value. Gray tucked the weapon into an empty holster at the back of his belt. Kaz got to his feet and charged the lieutenant. Gray evaded him and flipped the teen onto his back. Pinning the student to the ground with a knee, he plucked his badge from Kaz's shirt. Could have killed you last night, but I was glad you attacked them. I wanted to shoot them myself. Gray rapped his fist against Kaz's forehead. You do whatever you have to do, but one piece of advice, try to kill as few people as possible. Believe me. The officer stepped away. Kaz climbed to his feet and they glared at each other for a moment. Finally, Gray turned and walked from the level. This time, no one attempted to obstruct him. That same morning, kids mobbed to the administration building. The main hall was quiet, despite the throng of children. Metal posts, firmly anchored to the floor, broke up the lobby. Chains connecting the posts created an orderly pathway for occasions when the orphanage found itself crowded with new residents. Andrews, Jeffrey, and Skye stood at the main counter. Hambone and Kaz stood behind them. The secretary, Miss Mifton, stood behind the counter. She held the telephone like a shield between herself and the silent crowd of children filling her lobby. Miss Mifton reached whoever she'd called and turned her back on the students in an attempt at increased privacy. Kaz triggered the spring-loaded links and removed a section of chain from its rightful place. He quietly wrapped the chain around his fists. Behind him, Rudy, Taylor, and the others got the idea and quickly stripped all the chains from their posts and handed them out to comrades. Hambone shook his head. Here we go, he muttered. Shh, Kaz grinned with excitement. Miss Mifton turned back to face Drews. You say you're his attorney, she asked, pointing to Jeff. Yes, that's correct. I'm the family counsel, including his sister, Miss Ashley Fox. Please tell the governor. Miss Mifton held up a hand and turned away from Andrews. She intently listened to the party on the other end. Finally, she concluded her call, hung up, and turned back to the kids. The governor will be happy to see you. How's next Thursday? You mean this Thursday? Drews asked. No, I mean next Thursday. Oh, I can accept any documents or motions you'd like to submit to the court. I would like to see my client, Drews demanded. I'm afraid that's not possible. On what grounds? The district attorney is afraid someone will attempt to kill Miss Fox. She's being held in isolation for her own safety. The district attorney? Drews asked. Yes, that's right. Would you like to see him? She offered. I would. Produce him at once, Drews commanded. Well, he's not here. Listen, young man. The secretary leaned over the counter toward Drews. Kaz stepped forward and roughly shoved the smaller Andrews to the side and dropped his chain-wrapped fists on the counter. We know our rights. You can't withhold visitation or access to counsel. Miss Mifton ignored the implied threat. "Does this look like a jail to you? Have you all lost your minds? If you want jail, I can call security." The guard on duty, Ted, stepped up behind her. "No need, Misty. I'm right here." "Wait a second," Kaz said, looking at something on her desk. Ted and Misty paused. "Your little plaque here," he gestured to the triangular bar on the desk, "reads M. Mifton. I was wondering about that. Your name is Misty Mifton? Did your parents hate you or what?" The packed hall giggled and snickered. "Aren't you lucky little rabbits supposed to be in school?" Ted asked. "We're taking a few days off, Ted. You got a problem with that?" Ted came out from behind the counter. "I guess you're not one of the lucky ones, huh?" Ted came down the few steps of the elevated secretary's platform. Instead of being taller than Kaz, like he was behind the counter, he was now half a foot shorter. Kaz burst into laughter. "Come on, man. I wasn't going to hurt Madam Molly. Can't we just let it go?" He smiled as he backed up, tactically making more room for his showdown with Ted. "What's the matter? You scared, Zero?" "Scared of hurting you?" Kaz laughed. "Hurt this!" Ted clumsily attacked with his shock baton. Kaz avoided him and snapped a chain-wrapped fist into his face. Ted stumbled and coughed splintered teeth into the air. Kaz swung again, knocking him to the hard-tiled floor. He unwrapped the chain and hung it over his shoulder. He relieved Ted of his baton, his badge, and gestured to the nearby kids. "Get his gear." Several kids stooped to strip the unconscious Ted of his forearm bracers, shoulder bucklers, boots, and equipment belt. Kaz affixed the badge to his shirt as another kid put on the guard's cap. Kaz looked over to Misty and pointed the baton at her. "Tell the governor to release Ashley Fox, or I'll beat down every guard in this district." He pointed to the badge, held up 4 fingers, and winked at Misty. Kaz kicked Ted, lying unconscious on the floor. "Who's lucky now, dumb shit?" He turned toward the door just in time to see a 3-man patrol burst into the room. Kaz walked directly toward them. "Get on your knees!" he shouted. The guards saw Kaz, their fallen comrade, and a dozen kids all swinging 6-foot chains. The kids behind the guards stepped forward and drove them to their knees. Chains were wrapped and locked around their chests and necks, holding them in place. Kaz stepped up to the center guard, the officer, and pulled his sidearm from his holster. He cocked it and held it to the side of the citizen's face. The kids holding the guards hostage tore their gear and uniforms from them. Kaz tucked the handgun into his belt. "Leave this district and never come back. Understand?" The guards nodded. Kaz gestured for the kids to release the chains, and the humiliated soldiers ran from the building. The entire incident, from the time he struck Ted until the stripped patrol had burst from the lobby, had taken less than a minute. Kaz turned back to Miss Mifton. "Call the warden, the governor, the mayor. Call God, and tell him that if they don't let her go, I'm going to beat them stupid, just like Ted here." Kaz turned and exited the hall. The kids followed him out into the morning sunlight. The early rays shone on the chains and newly acquired gear. They immediately burst into mock fights. They loudly attacked each other with the chains, batons, bracers, and bucklers. Drews waited until the hall was empty, and he had Misty's full attention. He handed her some documents. He pointedly looked over at the beaten and unconscious Ted, and then back to her. "I'd appreciate it if you'd pass these on, but if I were you, I'd leave right now and never come back." Drews turned and followed his friends into the sunlight. As soon as the door closed, Misty grabbed her purse and fled the reception counter. She took the stairwell to the parking garage below. In less than a minute, she was homeward bound. In what she would later come to regard as the clearest and most astute decision of her life, Misty vowed never to return to District 13.